We're going to continue the gun conversation for another minute as we welcome Governor Jack Markell to First. Shirley and Mark join me as well. Governor, you've called for a common sense approach to guns, but is it bothersome to you that people across the state are rushing to buy guns, especially since the federal legislators are talking about it here and in the federal government?
Well, I'm a big believer in the Second Amendment, so people certainly have a right to go out and to buy guns and keep guns. But what we've proposed, first of all, we've a big proposal on mental health issues, a big proposal on school safety, and then with respect to guns, several pieces of common sense legislation, including background checks for everybody.
We're going to stay on guns for a little bit here. You talked in your State of the State address about the time that you went to the scene of a terrible shooting here in Wilmington last summer. We didn't really hear about your visit there when it happened. It was sort of kept under wraps. So why is now the right time to sort of bring that up? Why is
Actually,
that
I have talked about it a few times, but I thought I talked about it at the State of the State really in connection with my proposal to provide more after-school programming for kids. That night, 10th and Pine Streets, 10 o'clock at night, I went there because just a couple days earlier, a 16-year-old was shot and killed. I wanted to pay my respect at a memorial that had been set up, and as I drove down the street, there was nobody outside. When I got out of the car, within about 5 minutes, I was surrounded by a lot of people who basically said, all we want to do is raise our families in peace. And there was a little 10-year-old kid there, and he said, "You the governor?" I said, "Yes." And he says, I don't have anything to do. And unfortunately, his story is the story of too many kids. And in a perfect world, it would not be the responsibility of government to provide more after-school programming for kids, because his family, his neighbors, his community center, they would provide these opportunities. We don't live in that perfect world. And so what we're suggesting here is that the state provide some funding so that more of these kids have something to do, especially between 3 and 6 p.m. We know that it's between 3 and 6 p.m. that so many kids, especially adolescents, engage in risky behaviors, and we're trying to provide some alternative.
And with so many of those kids sort of stuck in that situation where they don't have anything to do, it would seem that providing after-school programs for them would be something that would cost a lot of money and take a lot of effort that the state really doesn't have.
I've proposed $2 million for that in the budget. Certainly doesn't take care of every kid, but what we'll do is we'll prioritize it based on areas where the kids have the fewest opportunities today. And it's not just about academic programming after school. It could be exposure to the arts, to physical activities, to nature, and the like. There's so many things that a lot of kids in Delaware get to take for granted, exposure to those kinds of opportunities. A lot of kids don't have them. And so we know the research is very, very clear that this kind of programming can make a profound difference in the life of a kid. And obviously we want to do everything we can to keep more of these kids on the right path.
You know, Governor, last weekend you were in Davos, Switzerland. This time next week you're going to be in Mumbai, India. Your first term, you made several international trips. And you've also had this theme of making Delaware competitive in the global economy. Are these trips a continuation of that theme?
They are. Let's put it this way. There are 3 billion people in the world looking for jobs, and there are 1.2 billion jobs available. We're in a global war for jobs. And the fact is, even right here in Delaware, if you think about it, a company from Korea recently purchased a poultry company down in Sussex County and saved hundreds of jobs. The steel plant in Claymont is now owned by a company from Russia. We've got companies from many different countries, Taiwan, India, Japan, that all have employees that are employing people right here in Delaware. And we want to make sure that these employers around the world understand Delaware's story and all that we have to offer.
Are there expectations you have for your trip to India that you are hoping become a reality?
Well, I'm going to give a speech at a big information technology conference, and I'm going to have the chance to sit down with a lot of IT leaders. And one of the things that people haven't realized is that over the last few years, more and more Indian companies have actually invested in the United States and started to employ people here. I mean, there are tens and tens of thousands of them. We want to make sure we have a chance to talk about the fantastic workforce we have in Delaware.
And then when you were in Switzerland, you had a chance to meet with the Secretary General of the UN. Tell us a little bit about what that meeting was like.
Well, that was a very interesting meeting. He's interested in creating stronger relationships with governors across the country, and since I'm chair of the National Governors Association, he asked to meet with me. But I also got to sit down with CEOs of companies that already employ people in Delaware. They're not based here. In fact, one of the CEOs, Fortune 50 company, has about 600 employees in Delaware. He's not had a chance to visit Delaware. I think he probably will now at some point. And again, I just wanted to let him know how much we value those 600 jobs in Delaware, and that we would do whatever we can to continue to facilitate their success here.
You recently made your budget presentation last week, and it sort of really holds the line on spending, just sort of increases in things that the state is required to pay more for. I think about $6 million in new initiatives, which is really kind of minuscule in a almost $4 billion budget. Is that the way things are going to be for the foreseeable future, sort of holding growth to only the things that we have to until the economy really starts revving again?
You know, the way I see it is that the job of governor has changed over the years. It used to be that governors and members of the General Assembly would sit down and they'd figure out how to spend incremental revenues that came on the table. That's really not how it is so much anymore, in Delaware, for that matter, across the country. And so one of the things we've got to do is we've got to figure out, here's where we're going to save so that we can invest in the things that are going to lead us to a prosperous future, or that help us protect those who are most vulnerable. And as you mentioned, about $6 million, less than 0.2% of the budget growth, is focused on new things, primarily around the after-school programming for kids that I mentioned a few minutes ago, as well as additional mental health services, particularly at the middle school level.
Any Fisker news on the horizon?
You know, they're working right now. They're searching for a partner. It's obviously an uncertain situation. You know, obviously pleased that the refinery is back up and running and employing people. Bloom has broken ground, so you can see the progress there. Fisker's been a difficult story. They've got a very good team of people. They've had their challenges, and they're working hard right now to try to get through it.
Can we get reaction to Tesla putting in some charging stations at the Welcome Center in Delaware? Just your reaction to that?
You know, I think it's interesting, and it is a bit of a sign of the future. This is one of the differences, actually. Tesla is electric only, and so if there's not a gas tank to fall back to. In Fisker, there is a gas tank to fall back to. But so the idea is you can stop, you can fill up your car with juice, the electricity. That only works if there's infrastructure that's built out. So I think it'll be a big investment for Tesla and some of these other companies over a period of time. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out for them.
I want to actually just talk about taxes, going back to the budget. You know, you have some state Republican lawmakers who are saying that a lot of these tax increases that were expected to expire this year, that now they're just permanent tax increases. They're kind of upset about it. What would you say to them? I mean, how do you kind of find a common ground now?
So here's what we did. Back in 2009, when we faced an $800 million budget shortfall, first thing we did was we cut. And we've been cutting for the last 4 years. We have the first administration, at least since the DuPont administration, to have fewer state employees today than we had 4 years ago. We did lots of cutting, but we did in fact raise some taxes at that time. So for example, the personal income tax, it had been at 5.95. It increased to 6.95. Then in 2011, we brought it down to 6.75, and now I'm proposing that it come down to 6.6. Similar story on the gross receipts tax. It went up, and we've reduced it in 2011, and another proposal to reduce it now. We would all love to reduce taxes as much as we possibly can. But we also recognize that there are certain investments that we have to make. There are certain, we have a responsibility to take care of those who are most vulnerable. We want to make sure we're continuing to invest in the things that will lead to a prosperous future, like education, workforce training, economic development, and the like. And so what we're trying to do is find that balance. And believe me, as we go forward, should the economy turn around and should the recurring revenues look like they're sustainable, we'd certainly be willing to have additional conversations. But in the meantime, you see how much health care spending is increasing. It's a significant challenge.
And as we end here on a much lighter note, transitioning, we have the University of Delaware women's basketball game coming up here on WHYY on Sunday, and they're looking like they're going to make a good run at March Madness. Something you'll be following, something you get excited about to see the team?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, this season we went in with very high expectations, started in the top 25, fell out of the top 25 for a little bit, now back in the top 25. It's exciting. And people ought to pay attention to the men as well, because they're doing some great stuff, as well as the teams down at Delaware State. But certainly the women's team And the finish they had last year, we just can't wait to see how far they go this year as well. We'll be following very, very carefully. I have a very proud item in my office in Dover, a basketball presented to me last year by Tina Martin, the coach of the women's team, and very proud of that.
Governor, we know you're busy. We always appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming and joining us on First.